You mentioned how they can teleport, that they can shapeshift, that they can remote view, really kind of amazing abilities that humans struggle to develop. But at the same time, you say that the Sasquatch don't have verbal speech. How does that work? I mean, was it just a particular evolutionary path that they chose, that they wouldn't develop verbal speech, which of course we know can be interpreted in many ways, but yet telepathic communications seems to be a universal language?
It sure is. It's the universal language, and that we can practice with every sentient being, including animals, even plants, and even more so with like higher intelligence. The Sasquatch, they don't need articulated speech. When you practice telepathy, as like they do, it's much more efficient and practical than having to speak words. The telepathic communication for me is a soul-to-soul connection. Is when our consciousness merge into a unified field, we can say, where information, thought forms, emotions, images can be shared. It's like a computer file that you put on a computer to read. And of course, when we call these information downloads. And each time I had these experiences, it keeps working for a while before you can assimilate, decode it, understand, and then express it. And that's how they asked me to write those books, because they send me this information and they asked me to put it in our human language, in this case in English, to transmit it.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Sunbow Truebrother to Exopolitics Today. I first learned about Sunbow back in around 2016 when I read this incredible 50-chapter ebook that was made available online called Sasquatch, A Message to Humanity. And it truly intrigued me. It was really an amazing book. And I am very glad that I finally get to talk with Sunbow and get to ask him questions about that book and what he's been doing since. So welcome to the show, Sunbow.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very honored to be on your podcast.
Well, just to give people a bit of an idea of you, Sunbow, I mean, you sent me a bio. So you've been working for over 40 years now, working with indigenous nations and spiritual elders, and also had connections with non-human intelligent beings, Sasquatch, and the star elders, star visitors or extraterrestrials. And you've had physical encounters, you've had telepathic communications, and you've actually channeled them as well. So when did that all begin for you? When did you first have these experiences with non-human intelligence?
We can say it starts lifetimes ago. The process to be prepared to have these connections and do this work. In this life, since childhood, I always had paranormal phenomenon happening around me, and contacts with the spirit world and with other worldly beings, which I could not understand with the education I had. So my first encounter, close encounter with Sasquatch happened in 81 when I was 17. And at the same time, it started a long process. At the same time, I started having UFO sightings and encounters with star beings, some in the physical, some in the astral plane, out of body experiences, and also telepathy. And these experiences put me on that path. But at the same time, I started learning shamanic ways with several elders of dozens of indigenous nations across America and as well later in Australia, who have a great deal of knowledge about all these phenomena, about non-human intelligent beings and ongoing contacts in many cases. So this helped me to understand, to assimilate the experiences, but as I often say, it took me 33 years of shamanic training to be ready and able to just openly go out and meet the Sasquatch and communicate with them in what we call a CE5, a close encounter of the fifth kind, which is like a willful engagement and to communication. This has transformed my life in many ways. Basically, it brought me a lot of answers and understanding to many questions I had not been answered before in the various spiritual teachings I had received, because direct experience is the best teacher. So that started with and the story I've told a lot. I will just say in a couple of words. In '81, when a Sasquatch came, I was with 9 other young men, and Sasquatch came in the middle of the night and put down our camp. The roof fell in our face, and well, nobody could understand what happened except, speculations. Within the same week, I took my first vision quest. So pretty much one of the first steps in the shamanic path to go out and ask for a vision until you meet your spirit guides or you receive a message for your own guidance. And so that started for a long time, but I had several contacts over the years, hearing them, seeing them, and finding their structures or tracks or things that, and seeing spaceships as well. But all these decades, those first 3.5 decades of my path, I was discovering and trying to figure out until 2014, when I discovered, by talking with my Cree native cousins, that my great-great-grandfather was with his twin brother found in the wilderness by the Great Slave Lake in the Northwest Territories by some Cree trappers. They were around 8-year-old. They were living in a hut of branches and wearing rawhides, eating bugs and roots, and they didn't speak any human language. So when I asked my cousin about this story I had found in an old gazette from the mid-1800s, she told me that we are part Sasquatch. We have Sasquatch in the family. So that made me realize I'm 1/32nd Sasquatch, which is not as rare as most people would think. There's a lot of similar stories among native tribes in America and Asia and Australia and elsewhere. Sasquatch have interbred or shared their genetics with us humans. especially in cultures that have acknowledged them and honored them. So that triggered me to find out who are those relatives and how can we connect or communicate. And it started a process, a year-long process where I was researching and I was looking online and finding, I would say, a lot of misleading information, intentionally or not, but a lot of speculation and theories that do not provide valid information. I would say close to 95% of what can be found online on Sasquatch is definitely not the real deal. The best source of information is, of course, first-hand experiencers who had contacts, sometimes on multiple, sometimes even regular, ongoing contacts. And the indigenous cultures who have known those beings and interacted for generations, and they all still to this day, some tribes have some very regular contacts and interactions with them. They honor them in ceremonies. So from there, I started to understand a little better who are the Sasquatch, but what really the best source of all to learn about them is themselves. And they started manifesting around me for a whole year, coming, walking on my roof and shaking the bus I was living in. I could hear their footsteps. I saw one come and look at me through the window 6 feet away for a good minute. And all these things kept happening, but I could not right away assimilate and understand or even accept that these things were really happening. I had to have more and more confirmation to say, well, I'm not going crazy, that there's really those phenomena that I'm experiencing. So after a whole year of this, I went in 2015, in May 2015, I went to Vancouver Island, which is the hotspot for Sasquatch reports and sightings. It has the largest number of reports since native days, ancestral days. So I went there by Kennedy Lake. It's a large lake. And as a vision quest to really, I went there, say, I want to know who you are. I had already, in 2003, a very clear sighting on Vancouver Island with another friend. So I knew they were around. So the first day I went out and I found footprints, very nice footprints. And I kept looking for a week and walking around, and until on the 8th day, I made a ceremony, which basically is offering and prayers with chants, drum and flute and smudge. And that night, my main teacher, whom has become known as Camus, came breaking trees and knocking on trees, and came and sat right behind my tent. And we started to communicate in telepathy. And I was afraid at first. I didn't know. But that first conversation, I can say, brought me a great understanding and connection, knowing right away there was no threat, there was no evil, there was no, it's another sentient being that has psychic abilities much more developed than us or the average human. And can manifest, they come often with paranormal, what we can say supernatural phenomena surrounding them, whether we say UFOs or it could be orbs, it could be, they can materialize and dematerialize, they can have something materialize. They can project their thoughts. They can impregnate an area of their consciousness, so you feel surrounded by them, you feel watched. All these abilities, they started to explain and teach to me, and then they started to ask me to write it down. And the Sasquatch Message to Humanity. It first started as a series of posts on Facebook, as I had a group with a large audience. And I was very hesitant at first because I figured, I mean, people won't believe any of it, or they will think I'm crazy or making this up and everything. But the following week after my first encounter, I went to the International Indigenous Leadership Gathering, which was held in Lillooet, BC. And I arrived early before the crowds, and I met the chiefs and elders and talked with them, and Sasquatch came on the subject. And they all had knowledge about it. And when I mentioned I had an encounter, they were all like interested, like, oh, what did it tell you? What happened? So I realized that, yeah, this knowledge is out there. There are people who have contacts, but they are not mainstream. They will rarely, have a blog or go on television or stuff like that. Most of the people I met that have had the greatest connections with either Sasquatch or star beings, I met them in like ceremonies or medicine circles, and very often they won't talk about it unless it's brought up. And they have to trust you. They have to know they can trust you, because otherwise most people will just laugh or ridicule this kind of information. So once you meet such elders and they confirm that, yeah, they saw a spaceship come down and a great tall white, for instance, carrying a Sasquatch, and the elder of the uncle of that elder went and helped the Sasquatch heal, and he became his guide. That's one kind of story, very short, that I hear in those medicine circles. So I realized that there was definitely this phenomena is definitely real, and it has so much we can learn from it.
So this encounter with Sasquatch really has been a progression over your life. You had your first sighting in 1981, then you have an encounter in 2003 on Vancouver Island, and then in 2015 you meet the elder Camus, who is the one that dictated to you the Sasquatch message to humanity. Now, one of the things you mentioned how they have all these psychic abilities, or these abilities to be able to kind of like move around without people noticing them, and you mentioned in the book that they can teleport, that they can shapeshift, that they can remote view, really kind of amazing abilities that humans struggle to develop. But at the same time, you say that the Sasquatch don't have verbal speech, so they don't talk at all, but they kind of like they can use grunts and so forth to communicate. So how does that work? I mean, was it just a particular evolutionary path that they chose, that they wouldn't develop verbal speech, which of course we know can be interpreted in many ways, but yet telepathic communications seems to be a universal language?
It sure is. It's the universal language, and that we can practice with every sentient being, including animals, even plants, and even more so with like higher intelligence. The Sasquatch they don't need articulated speech, but they can use it. They are intelligent enough. There are recordings, and I heard myself sometimes they kind of have some kind of a conversation, like mumbling, and where you can hear words, but it's not a human language. But it's more when you practice telepathy, as like they do, it's much more efficient and practical than having to speak words. So when I started communicating with them, there are, of course, all kinds of interactions. There are sounds, there are signs they leave you, but they can, you can feel a touch, you can see them. There's all the senses are involved, but the telepathic communication for me is a soul-to-soul connection. Is when our consciousness merge into a unified field, we can say, where information, thought forms, emotions, images can be shared. It's like a computer file that you put on a computer to read. And of course, when we call these information downloads. And each time I had these experiences, it keeps working for a while before you can assimilate, decode it, understand, and then express it or explain. So there's a lot of the messages I received that took me weeks or months to really understand all the details involved. And that's how they asked me to write those books, because they send me this information and they asked me to put it in our human language, in this case in English, to transmit it. So it's the same with star beings as well.
So we know the stories of Sasquatch are universal around the planet, and people have different descriptions for describing them. I mean, Sasquatch, of course, in North America, Bigfoot, also Yeti, Yowie, etc. And so there are reports of these beings kind of like having a similar description all over the planet. Unfortunately, none of that is ever substantiated, just reports and rumors. But it's very interesting that in ancient scripture that there are descriptions of these beings. And I know the most famous is the Vedic scriptures. They talk about the monkey people or the ape people and being led by Hanuman. And Hanuman appeared to be a Sasquatch that helped during the wars that one of the Hindu avatars, Rama, fought in. So is that what happened? Is that reality? Is that history, that many thousands of years ago there was a war, and in that war the Sasquatch helped one of the human sides, one of the kings, King Rama, in fighting against his enemy Ravana, as described in the Vedic scripture?
Yeah, that's a famous story from the Vedas. Ravana is described as a reptilian shapeshifter, who introduced their dynasty, their bloodline on Earth to rule. So that is not a new story. It's not a new age concept. It's very ancient, and you find such stories in all kind of ancient tradition, from the Hopi, from the Maya, all around the world, in Australia. Once you establish a contact with the Sasquatch or any kind of highly evolved telepathic beings, this contact can always be with you, regardless of space, time, or circumstances. Of course, there are circumstances that are more favorable if you go in the wilderness, for instance. but those contacts can always happen. And once they know you, they will, all their species, since they are connected through telepathy, they will all know you. So one of the first things that they taught me in my education was after I met Camus, 2 weeks later, I had another sighting near Yukon, face-to-face with another individual who also communicated with me. And from then on, just about everywhere I would go, or different regions, I would have some kind of contact, either hear a call from the mountain or find some tracks or signs. And this is what is hard to believe for most conventional researchers, because some of them have spent 70 years of their lives looking for Sasquatch or Yeti or Yahweh, as you mentioned, and without having anything, or maybe if they're lucky, hearing wood knocks or something, because it's a matter of is the approach. How do you want to meet those beings? How do you want to like study them like guinea pigs, or do you think you're smarter than them? That will not work. Are you going out with guns? That will not work at all. The way to approach these is like wise elders. You go humbly, sincerely. You have peace and loving intention. You want to learn from them, and this is how they will see you. They read our thoughts. They read our hearts. So they will allow or not a connection. And once they know you, once you become friend, then they'll be your friend for life. They can manifest in many places, different individuals. And for instance, when I went to Australia, I found out that I was going there with the intention, the expressed intention of going to research about the Yahweh. There are many different names. There are different types as well. Like there's bigger ones they call Duliga. There's a small, short ones they call Nit or Nimbin or John Jerry. The different names the tribes give to those beings. When I started meeting Aboriginal people, communities, and elders, and the Yahweh came on the topic, just about everybody had a story, either first hand or second hand. They had like, oh yeah, they live in this mountain here, or we hear them sometimes. So that my first night, I was going, I arrived in Australia, I had an encounter with 3 of them who came to welcome me. And then throughout all my travel around Australia, they kept manifesting. It's not like a daily thing, but it's certain occasions, special places, with additional teachings and guidance. So what I notice is that the Yahweh or the Yeti, or even the short ones, the Janjali, for instance, they're all related, just like they are all closely connected with the star beings, the star elders. They have never left what I call the Council of Star Elders. That some ancient traditions, like the Hopi, mention that our ancestors, humans, used to be part of that council, but we were ousted because we misbehaved. We lost the connection with the cosmic law, and so these star elders continue watching over the world, over their development, the evolution of life, soul, consciousness, and Yahweh. The difference between them and the ones we call, I say, hairy humanoids, as a generic term, including Yahweh, Yeti, Sasquatch, and all the Bigfoot. They have been here on this planet since long before us humans were conceived. They are also our closest relatives from several DNA studies, including the Sasquatch Genome Project, a 5-year study by Dr. Melba Ketchum in Texas, with hundreds of over 100 samples. And it all points out that we share 99% of the same DNA, as compared to the big apes, who share 95% of our DNA. So the Sasquatch, that is why they have a certain responsibility, or they care about us, whom they call younger brothers, younger relatives, as elders would care for their siblings, their younger siblings. So for this reason, they are like ambassadors between us and the Star Council. They are our closest link to the Star People.
So can you explain a little bit about Elder Kamooh, who seems to be the key Sasquatch here in communicating with you, and you describe him as an elder. So how old is he? I know you say Sasquatch can live many thousands of years. So how old is he, and why did he choose you to be the person that would transmit the Sasquatch message to humanity?
There is actually several other people who have channeled him. There are dozens who have told me they had an encounter with him, some kind of contact. And Camus has never been alone. As an elder, he can speak on behalf of his people. He's connected with the greater soul, like also like the matrix, the telepathic matrix that connects all the species. So they can know what happens with each one individual through that greater soul. They can also have access to all the knowledge of their species. So Camus most of the time, talk on behalf of the Council of the Sasquatch Elders, and as well as the Star Elders, because he's part of it. So there are several other individuals that I met that are also mentioned in those books, especially in book 2 and 3. And there's each of those individual Sasquatch has their own personality, their own history, their own teachings. But the wise ones speak on behalf of their people. So it's always like a collective consciousness. If I talk about my contacts with Star people, for instance, Star Elders, I like to say, because there's all kind of Star people, just like there's all kind of people. And among them, there's some elders or wise ones who are watchers over the worlds and who offer guidance and protection. And they're the ones I work with, because not all Star people, just like not all people, have our best interests at heart or have the best intentions and agenda. So when I communicate with Star beings, very often they speak as we. It's a collective consciousness. And I ask them more than once, where do you come from? Because I see this spaceship hovering above, or things like that. Where do you come from? And their answer is pretty much always the same, is that they come from so many places we have never heard of. We have no clue, no idea that they exist. And they they combine in this collective consciousness in that council. So once I asked them this question, and they started showing me their faces one after the other, and I realized they were all from different species, different lineages and planets, most likely, but they're all united. It's like if we go at the United Nations and ask the people there where you come from, they will all have a different answer. If we ask what's your purpose, what's your intention and agenda, for instance, at the United Nations, we'll have a lot of different answers. Whether we speak to a Russian or Ukrainian or American or Chinese or Israeli or Arab. But the United Nations, it's a very pale comparison, but it's a circle where there's an attempt, at least, to try to find some balance and peace on this planet. Very frail attempt, but so the Council of Star Elders is like this. They from all their different histories, their different backgrounds, their different ancestral lineages, they carry different karmas. But when they join the Council of Star Elders, they unite in a collective common will to maintain balance in the universe.
That's very important, that the balance in the universe and global peace, that seems to be a theme that comes through the Sasquatch message to humanity again and again. So in terms of this global peace, I know one of the interesting connections is the connection between Sasquatch and the ancient civilization of Lemuria, that the Sasquatch were very much involved with Lemuria, and Lemuria had a conflict with Atlantis, and the Atlanteans were more scientific, the Lemurians were more kind of spiritual. So can you describe what happened according to Sasquatch in that ancient conflict?
Yes, from the information they gave me, which I must say that when I wrote the Sasquatch Message to Humanity, I had already done some research and studies. But since it's published, I keep finding more and more confirmations from countless sources, ancient and new sources, that confirm the information they asked me to share. In regard to Atlantis, Lemuria, the inner Earth, the hollow moon, and all these different topics that have been addressed by various researchers or ancient sources. So Lemuria was, according to most sources, was the birthplace, the cradle of humanity, where we were conceived and created by star beings. We know with modern science that us humans have a splice gene, which is not found in nature, so we have been genetically modified. Just like the Sasquatch, we are a hybrid. There's been many other hybrids before and since. And this, the dawn of humanity was an era, golden era of highly conscious civilization, free energy, highly advanced technologies, and where the Earth was a intergalactic outpost where many star elders from various galaxies and star systems would gather and visit. And Atlantis, when we talk about Lemuria or Atlantis, it stretches over such long periods of time. We talk about millions of years, that it's hard to summarize, like in a couple of sentences, what happened there. There was various phases of development or destruction that followed, downfalls. There were several wars, some interstellar wars, in which the Earth was involved. And then there was also intercontinental wars between empires like Atlantis and Lemuria. The series of war between Atlantis and Lemuria happened later, like relatively later in their history. They had time of cooperation and very harmonious relations and civilizations, until, you know, some factions and some different groups started to be more concerned about service to the self than service to the whole. And, you know, greed and thirst for power and all those things happen, and which eventually caused a series of war between Lemuria and Atlantis that ended up, because there was also a downfall in Lemuria. There was, at some point, Lemuria was sunk, was destroyed, and Atlantis soon followed. But this did not happen necessarily overnight. There was a series of geological changes and cataclysm that could have come through through waves over a period of time. So the exact outline of Lemuria or Atlantis is practically impossible to know, because or just for one period of time we can try to figure it, but those tectonic plates, you know, split and cracked and bumped into each other, and Lemuria, from there was basically two first parts in the landmass, which is North Hyperborea and South Hyperostra, and that split into other continents we know, including Atlantis and Lemuria. And at some point, Australia, for instance, was part of or connected to Lemuria. That's why we still find the oldest human cultures there, as well as the oldest rocks, oldest flora, oldest fauna on the planet. And if we talk about Antarctica, that was part of it too, and there's still a lot to discover in Antarctica, but we know now that there's been lush rainforests and dinosaurs there, and civilizations too.
We know the Sasquatch also had contact with the inner Earth civilizations that during that cataclysmic war with Atlantis that lasted, you know, that, as you mentioned, it was on and off for several periods, that there were a sequence of wars over a long period of time, but that over that time, there were a lot of Lemurians and even some of the Atlanteans, according to stories, that went under earth to establish places like Telos in Mount Shasta. So is Telos a city under Mount Shasta, which is a remnant of the Lemurians, and are Sasquatch involved in that?
Yes, I mentioned Telos in the book 2 of the series, and there's also more detail about Atlantis and Lemuria, including that when before their continents sunk and during the wars, some of the population found refuge underground, and this is found in just about every ancient tradition around the world. And there were already beings, hybrid beings living underground on this planet. So humans, we can say, like, that's why in Telos in Mount Shasta, they say that they're the Lemurians who went under there. I had a contact with one of them, which is described in book 2. I also went around Mount Shasta several times, on Mount Shasta also. There's unexplained remains, stone remains with stone walls and big structures around Mount Shasta, especially on the north side, but elsewhere, and as well along the west coast. And there's no, it's discarded because when there's no official explanation, doesn't fit with conventional history. Those things are ignored, but there's tons of remains to be found around the world. I've seen several myself, pyramids where they're not supposed to be, like in Arizona, or there's underwater cities that are being found. There's under the desert sands, under the ice, that show that civilization existed long before what we're being taught in conventional history. So the underworld or inner earth, I would say, I'm not exactly sure. It wasn't explained to me if it's a hollow earth or if it's just sections of the earth that is hollow. What is seems clear from many ancient traditions is that there are civilizations living underground, and many have been there for longer than us. And there are, among them is the same story as with all people, all star people. There are different agenda, different intentions. Some are watching and helping, others are trying to control. There can be struggles between certain factions. But to understand the bigger picture, we have to realize that we're not alone, and there's always been all these influences that have interacted with humanity, and even often passed on their genes. The Chinese geneticists have discovered 265, I believe, horizontal genes that were introduced in the human genome over time. We also know by now that all the different hominins used to interbreed and live side by side. So we're a melting pot. We're definitely hybrids, and the underground civilization are still with us today.
You've already mentioned the Star Council a few times, so I just wanted to get an idea of what the Star Council is. And you said that at some point humans were part of the Star Council, that they had representation on it, and then they were kicked off because they took a negative path. And I'm assuming maybe that was what happened with the Atlanteans, and they were kicked off. So with the Star Council, is that the kind of same body? Some people today talk about the Galactic Federation of Worlds, others talk about the Confederation of Planets, some talk about the Ashtar Command. So is the Star Council kind of like one of those, or is it something separate that has representatives from each of these other organizations? What do you know of the Star Council and these different extraterrestrial organizations that other people talk about?
Yeah, these are all different names that I believe refer to the same concept somehow. The way it was, well, I can say, for instance, I met a Hopi master. White Bear was one of the main sources for the Book of the Hopi. And he had on his front yard a collection of spaceship parts. And I also found some, and he told me I would find some where I would go to that certain room. There's a lot of UFO sightings on Hopi land. Where I'm getting with this is that he's the one who told me, and that's in the mid 80s, where he told me that he was the last human at that moment, representing humanity in the Council of Star Elders. We would also call it the Confederation of Planets. And they would land behind his house on the Prophecy Rock and take him for rides to help him record all the ancient petroglyphs of the Americas and explain them at the light of Hopi knowledge. So there's the Council of Star Elders is the name I prefer, or the Star Elders Council, or which to express this concept is when a species or planetary civilization reaches a certain level of evolution, first of all, to have the first level of civilization, which is a planetary civilization. It means the species, the intelligent species living there, has learned how to live in harmony with their planet, their environment, how to harness free energy without destroying the resources or without fighting over them. So that level, it's when civilization can start becoming star-faring nation. Us humans are not quite there. We're aiming to get there. We have some rocket ships that are not going to make it that far. And we have, of course, there's secret space program with stargates and anti-gravity and all those things that we can we hear about. And so the Star Council, when we become to this level, we can start joining them. They will come and reach us. They will come and connect and say, okay, now you understand what it is to live in peace with your planet. Then you're probably ready to live in peace with other planets. Before that, it's no use trying to get somewhere else. The second level is stellar civilization, and the third level is a galactic civilization. So these, when a species become evolved enough to become elders, which means they can be caretakers, they can be teachers, they can be protectors, watchers, and that level they can join the Council of Star Elder and participate in maintaining the cosmic law, universal balance, and helping the development of worlds, of life forms, and of consciousness.
I know you talk about the elders of the Star Council. Now, people have talked about the 24 civilizations that help seed humanity. They mention the Guardians or the Seeders or the Intergalactic Federation, something that involves a very high level, highly developed in terms of consciousness, maybe like at the 6th density of beings that are separate to compared to like the Pleiadians or the Syrians that are maybe more direct hands-on experiences. So these elders of the Star Council, are they like this high-level body that operates at a galactic and intergalactic level?
Yes, they to become a star-faring people. The first condition, well, first we have to have enough knowledge and wisdom, which involve the understanding of interdimensionality. We're never gonna make it too far with a fuel rocket. We need to understand the fabrics of the universe, how space-time can be bent, how wormholes or stargates operate, and so to become to reach that level, it takes not only knowledge, but it takes wisdom, because this kind of technology can be very harmful if it's used wrongly, and we know it is in some cases, even here on this planet. But there's an evolution that is part of the natural process, that is the actual purpose of existence, of a physical incarnation, physical evolution. This plane is the plane of creation and evolution. We are co-creators as we take part in the process, and we influence the outcome, the history. So for the Star Elders, to be on that council where they can watch over worlds, they have to reach at least that first level of civilization where they have mastered harmonious, peaceful civilization. It doesn't mean they don't have weapons or means to defend themselves, but they're not aggressive. They don't go out on planets to take over or to colonize. Some species do it, but the ones I call Star Elders, they're actually watching so those things don't happen too much or cause too much problems or havoc.
Now, you describe in the book that there have been a succession of different genetic experiments on Earth, that the star visitors created hybrids, first using kind of fish DNA spliced with extraterrestrial DNA, creating the fish people. And after that, it was the ant people and then the reptilians. So can you kind of like just describe, summarize these different genetic experiments creating a predominant kind of like physiology, like the fish people and then the ant people, and why it was done that way? Why did you just, well, why did they have first the fish people, then the ant people, then the reptilians, then the bird people? So why was it done in that sequence?
The main reason is because they used the genetic material that was available in those past eras. When the intelligence species, starfaring nation, come to a young planet to help it develop, they can first introduce some life forms, natural species, whether bacteria, fungi, or to help develop an atmosphere, to help develop ecosystems, make the terraforming, help make the planet suitable for physical life. Once there's this ground, this environment, the next phase to accelerate the evolution of consciousness is to introduce their genetics from highly intelligent species. But if they do not like take over the planet, they will use the genetic stock available to create hybrids. So why did they start with the fish people, and then the ant or insect people, then the reptile or lizard people, and then the bird people or avians, and until the Sasquatch and us came along, is because that was following the natural process of evolution on Earth. So this life and consciousness are being transmitted across the universe as what the scientists call Panspermia, except it's not just always isolated bacteria on a meteorite. There's a lot of intelligent interventions in the process to supervise and to make sure things happen according to plan and to correct if there's mistakes. So this is why there's been all these hybrids. And if we look at today's sightings, reports of sightings of humanoids, these are the ones that make the most that are more common, starting by reptoids and insectoids. There's also human-like. There's also avians. And we can say that fish people or water beings have been part of all the ancient traditions around the world. So these are all relatives. They have their own karma, their own agenda and history, but we should never consider any species or any race, as a matter of fact, as enemies. We should consider them as relatives who have their own struggles, their own evolution, and the best we can do is do our part in helping the larger process.
So what happened to some of these hybrid species? Like in particular, the bird people, they were the fourth genetic experiments that the Star Council did on Earth. So what happened? Did they get exterminated, or did they just evolve into some higher density and are now kind of like coming back and helping us in some way?
Yeah, well, again, among all those classes, like we just mentioned, there are almost an infinity of varieties and branches. There can be all kinds of different avians, which mean people with bird genetics, or reptilians, people with reptile genetics, and so on. And all these different branches evolve across the cosmos, and all in their own different ways, their own different history and karmas, and they develop their intentions and their agenda. And so we cannot even categorize and say, oh, those guys are good, those guys are bad, because who are we to say? What are we, us human? Are we a benevolent or a malevolent species? Are we beneficial or detrimental to other life forms? It's a very hard question to answer because we can be both. So and there's human groups and factions that are definitely working against our best interests and bringing destruction and war and what you can say evil. So the same applies in the cosmos. It doesn't mean because one, let's say, reptilian faction has been waging war or deception, that all the reptilian beings are necessarily doing that. So for the avian, as you asked, one of the main name they are, or known by, in my understanding and the information I received, is the Anunnaki. Which means people who came on Earth from the sky, who founded pretty much the ancient civilizations of this era we're aware of. After traveling the cosmos and colonizing other countries and other planets, and they also created this artificial planet that became their main home, which is often called Nibiru. So they still interact with humans. They have their bloodlines on it. They have probably most of us, or many of us, have their genetics, carry their genetics. So we have to be aware that there is always challenges in all kinds of relations, all types of interspecies interactions, and but it's never all black or all white. There's no straight line between good and bad. It's made of all kinds of shades of gray, and the purpose of it all is to all together, by creating a interaction, is to learn from each other's experience, each other's knowledge, and to be able to heal the wounds and the karmas, to make a better future in our evolution.
Well, you mentioned the Anunnaki and Nibiru, and that is generally, I think, Zecharia Sitchin kind of like came up with this dating. He said around 400,000, 500,000 years ago, was when the Anunnaki arrived and began to create the humans. And the humans, according to the Sasquatch, are the sixth genetic experiment, and the Sasquatch are the fifth. So the Sasquatch are like our elder brothers. So how did the Sasquatch kind of like deal with the arrival of the Anunnaki and the creation of humans? Were the Sasquatch kind of like involved? Were they just kind of like observing from a distance? How did that kind of play out?
The Sasquatch have been interacting with countless different type of intelligent species. The Anunnaki are one. Again, in their history, we talk about 100,000, possibly millions of years of history and interaction. There were, for the better and for worse, there were all kind of conflicts. There was also cooperation. We received teaching, we received help, but we also faced some groups, some factions that were trying to take over, to control, and it's not over yet. Actually, we're today still in a cosmic war, we can say, cosmic conflict, where there's struggle, there's some faction want to control, to take over, to arm others, while others are trying to protect. So all species, including the Sasquatch, have had their rogue factions or individuals, and have had their dark pages in their history. According to Sitchin, the Sasquatch, well, he doesn't say the Sasquatch, but the previous version of humanity was also enslaved for gold mining, for instance, and were later discarded and replaced by us human, because we are maybe because we have different abilities, but also that means some we might not have, like a psychic protection or stuff like that. Maybe we're us modern humans, Homo sapiens, have a smaller brain than our Cro-Magnon ancestors. So something happened. We must have lost some psychic abilities in this process. So we were modified to be more easily controllable. And nowadays we see the consequences, because we're the only species on this planet that is openly and very often willingly destroying other life forms and the very environment we depend on, ecosystems, biodiversity. But we're not alone in this story. There's other influences. We all hear, that the governments have secret deals with certain factions to get more power, more technology, in exchange of more control from those ET factions over us humans, including abduction for genetic experiments, stuff like that. So yeah, the Sasquatch and the Anunnaki had at times collaboration, at some times war, and just like we're inheriting of all this past baggage.
Now, Elder Kamooh, your Sasquatch teacher, describes a secret genocide campaign against the Sasquatch that's being led by the lower lords. So who are the lower lords, and why do they want to exterminate the Sasquatch?
The ones I call the lower lords, from what I received, are actually those factions who go against natural harmony, cosmic law, balance, and peace. the ones that want to take over and control and harm. So their intention, their energetic level is lower. Doesn't mean they have less power or anything. It's just that they're on the consciousness scale, they're lower. So yes, they have and still do influence the destiny of our planet, as of many other planets. However, they're not almighty. They're not. They only control as long as we let them, as we agree and submit to the rule. And even then, can heal. One of the things I've learned in my shamanic training is that, well, what we can call exorcism, or facing evil entities, or freeing people or places from hunting presences. And this to happen, it takes compassion. It's just no judgment. It's just compassion. It's the same on a larger scale, let's say cosmic scale, where if any species, any group is trying to attack or harm us, well, we have a right to defend ourselves, but not with hatred, not with revenge, with consciousness. So some of them might even heal and change their ways. And from learning from several encounters I had with, they're not all angels, you know. Some of those beings you meet there, it might be frightening, but once you get into that compassion, that universal love, unconditional love, the fear goes, and you see just a relative with his own background, his own baggage, and you just wish for their best. And if you have this attitude, any being, or at least has the potential to learn and heal and change their ways. So this is how interspecies communication, peaceful on a spiritual perspective, is the key for a greater evolution of the cosmos, because all those species have interacted and influenced our human destiny, and we cannot heal ourselves or solve our problems without including them in the equation.
So the Sasquatch have been trying to help humanity develop psychically, spiritually, so that we can promote global peace and reconnect with the Star Council. But on the other hand, the lower lords have been trying to degrade human consciousness and tamper with genetics. So transhumanism seems to be very a powerful trend today. So is that really all driven by these lower lords that want to degrade human consciousness and genetics so that they can manipulate humanity and stop us from expanding and joining the galactic community?
The Sasquatch warned us about transhumanism, and they present it as probably the biggest threat in our current generation, because it's definitely artificial genetic modification that also connect humans to technology, so make them part of the hardware, basically. And the more, we can start with nanoparticles, and then a chip implant, and then what they call augmenting devices, and into artificial intelligence plugged into the brain. First of all, we don't know what all of this can do. It's a very risky, dangerous experiment. But on top of that, if those technologies, as it is pretty much the case now, are controlled by controllers, but people who want to use these technologies to make us more servile, more submitted, less autonomous, less free thinkers. And then it's a very, very dangerous. And I'm not the only one who said that. Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and many others have warned against that artificial intelligence can be more dangerous than the nuclear bomb. So the transhuman agenda is definitely, it's like putting our soul forbidding. It's like saying, well, let's see if we can do better than nature. And we'll never be able to do better than nature.
Very, very true. So in terms of, since this Sasquatch Message for Humanity came out in 2015, in the 7 years since it came out, has there been an improvement? Have we gone backwards? I mean, where do we stand now? Do you think the message has helped? Do you think humanity is like on the verge of making this transition into the kind of future that the Sasquatch are trying to help us? Or do you think we are more likely to go down this negative path of the lower lords, transhumanism, and global destruction?
There is actually a split happening. There is different paths that are taken, and we cannot expect everyone to follow the same path. There will be different outcomes to each path. We can say there is degradation and there is progress happening. One of the progress I've seen, for instance, just let's say on the scientific level, there's things that I've, at least 3-4 things that I've described in the book 2 of the Sasquatch Message to Humanity that have been proven by science since, or at least published by scientists. For instance, that the neutrinos travel in their particle form faster than the speed of light, which corrects the theory of relativity. Or that the supersymmetry, that every physical particle has an antimatter twin or ghost. And different things like that that I expressed in those channel messages I received that were eventually confirmed within a few years by official institutions like CERN, for instance. That's one level. The other level is that when I first wrote the first book, there was very little, at least literature, about interdimensional Sasquatch, and there was a few books out, a few articles, and of course, since the 70s, 60s maybe. But it was always like very marginal. It was like the Woo Clan, and it was, discarded at first. Especially even in the Bigfoot world, where there's still people who hunt for a big ape and they'll never find one because there's no big ape out there in North America or Australia. So the progress I've noticed is like substantial progress in the last 6-7 years, let's say, is that there's more and more conventional researchers. I've had conversation with like Dr. Dmitry Bayanov, the founder of Hominology in Moscow, 7 years of career. Just before he passed, he read the Sasquatch Message to Humanity and was totally blasted, although he wanted to know more. He said, this is historic. This is the kind of information we've been looking for, although at first he was trying to debunk me, I talked with Dr. Melba Ketchum, who's done the Sasquatch Genome Project, 5-year research scientific research with peer review that on the Sasquatch genetics, and she lost basically her credits in the mainstream scientific world for doing this. And I talked with her, and she said, well, also while she was doing it, they were instructing her telepathically. So those are just two examples. I could give more. There are people who have done since movies like the Supernatural, Bigfoot, or Paranormal Sasquatch, and things like that, that we've never barely heard of 5-10 years ago. But that it's becoming more and more discussed and presented from many sources. Now, if you look at the whole Bigfoot world, it tends more and more to converge with UFO research, paranormal, including ghosts and other kind of such phenomena. And it tends more and more to be there's always the narrow-minded people whose best argument is an insult, for instance, but they're not the ones who are going to make knowledge advance. What I notice is that there's more and more opening, and I get consulted just about daily. People have spoken to probably 500 people by now who have had contacts with Sasquatch and or star beings. And people who would not have come out of the closet before for fear of being ridiculed and attacked, and it still happens. But when they find a safe platform, a safe circle where they can share this, we've had, I have a website, there's books, there's groups, there's international events now that address those topics. And they gain fast in popularity because that's where we find the real answers. 70 years of tracking footprints, that's about just what we learn. But when we look at this information, which is nothing new, it's ancient. Every ancient tribal shaman would, not every, but many would confirm these interdimensional factors, the psychic abilities and all that. So that's this, I would say there is definitely substantial progress being made in the general mentality, at least of a certain group of the population. Will never be mainstream because we're not there yet, maybe in another few generations, but at this point, we have Pentagon hearings, so-called disclosure, where we see like 3 little dots moving on the screen, and they say we don't know what it is, UAP task force, but they're certainly a threat. This is a bit an insult to our intelligence, because the US government, among others, certainly has much more information than they will ever let us know, and we shouldn't.
Very true. Very true. So you're going to be one of the featured speakers at this Galactic Spiritual Informers Conference in Orlando in October 21st to 23rd. So are you going to be, what are you going to be talking about? And is there anything new that you're going to be presenting at this conference?
That's a good question. I didn't really think about it yet. And I've given several presentations and conferences about the topic, and usually there's always new elements from, for instance, I could say yesterday, I went out on a mountaintop with a friend, and we heard Sasquatch knocking on woods, and so there's always things happening, but the message is pretty much out of time, intemporal. The message itself is it remains, it evolves. Of course, there's 3 books in the series. And the third book is written by 10 co-authors. It's a collaboration and of people who channel Sasquatch from Australia and including different places. After that, I wrote, with their guidance, I wrote the Encyclopedia of All Things Sasquatch, Hairy Humanoids from the Wild. And in this book, they asked me to pretty much go through all the documented literature since 6,000 years about the Sasquatch, from ancestral tribal tradition and ancient texts like the Vedas to historic reports, scientific research, including the cover-up, including the covert genocide, because there's been multiple, just in the last 60 years, let's say, expeditions organized by major powers of the world, including the United States with the CIA, Russia with the KGB, MI6 in Great Britain, other countries, China, France, Japan, all had secret, or let's say covered operations to chase those beings, like Sasquatch or Yeti. So, and there's, since 5,000 years, there's documented cases and dozens of those beings being caught, being killed around the world. So when people say, where's the evidence? It's hidden. There's even in the 20th century, there's several cases where Sasquatch bodies, corpses were captured or killed or found. And we always hear about those black choppers coming and closing the area and picking up the evidence so nobody knows about it. So that's another aspect that is not often addressed in the Bigfoot world, but that is explains a lot why the public knowledge is not evolving this fast. Just like we were talking about the Pentagon briefing, it's like, okay, after Project Blue Book and all these things, 70 years later, we admit, okay, we see something. What about those secret deals with the Greada Treaty and all the government technological exchange? We won't be told by them, that's for sure. We'll be told by whistleblowers, by insiders, first-hand witnesses. So this is where I believe there is still progress to be done to break the secrecy, to disclose the real story. And we'll never understand Sasquatch or star beings without understanding or acknowledging the paranormal, interdimensional aspect of their existence.
Well, I think your Sasquatch books are very important. They have a lot of information. I really enjoyed reading it. The information about the history of the different genetic experiments, that itself is really worth looking into. But I found it very disturbing how the Sasquatch have been kind of hunted, and the genocide that you discussed, that's been going on for a long time to kind of stop their peaceful message and them helping us evolve spiritually and morally, so we can take our place in the universe. So where do people go to get the books and to learn more about you and read your articles?
Well, my website is scenicsasquatch.com. Scenic, SCENIC, stands for Sasquatch Close Encounter Network for Interspecies Communication. On that website, there's over 800 articles by now with links to videos and different topics by categories. And on the homepage, there's the links to my 6 published books now, 6 in the last 6 years. And the Sasquatch Message to Humanity series is on Amazon and affiliated distributors. My Encyclopedia of All Things Sasquatch, and the next series I'm writing, Contemporary Shamanic Journeys, are also on Amazon, but I suggest, recommend people to purchase from lulu.com because the author is a much fairer share.
Well, I highly recommend people get this, read the first book in the series. It really is just jam-packed with information. So I want to thank you, Sunbow, for coming on Exopolitics today and sharing your incredible information about the Sasquatch message for humanity.
Thank you very much. If I may add one word, is that the book is now being translated in German, Indonesian, Hungarian, and so on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sunbow.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.